Boxing has always walked this razor-thin line between being an incredible athletic spectacle and, well, a brutal reality. But a recent, absolutely shocking tragedy has forced the entire sport to take a hard look in the mirror and ask if that line has been crossed for good. So today, we're going to deconstruct the complex web of factors from the hidden science to the warrior culture that make modern boxing so unforgiving. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll start with a specific incident that really sent shockwaves through the entire boxing world. From there, we'll get into the dangerous science of weight cutting. Then, we'll look at the pretty sobering data on brain damage, explore the cultural pressures these fighters are under, and finally, check out the search for safer rules in a sport that, let's be honest, seems to resist change. So let's set the scene. It all kicks off on a summer night in 2025. At a place that's basically sacred ground for boxing fans, Tokyo's legendary Korakuen Hall. But what happened that night was a tragedy that the sport is still to this day trying to process. On a single night, two young fighters, both just 28 years old, Shigetoshi Kodori and Hiramasa Urakawa, fought in separate bouts. A few days later, both of them were dead from brain injuries they got in the ring. For this to happen once is a massive tragedy. For it to happen twice, on the same card, that's just unheard of. It left the whole community in shock. This wasn't just some freak accident, right? This points to something much bigger, a failure in the system. And it forced everybody to ask this one brutal question: how could this possibly happen? And to find the answers, you really have to look past the final bell and into the dangerous practices that lead these fighters into the ring in the first place. So in the immediate aftermath, in the court of public opinion, one thing got singled out right away: the extreme and frankly dangerous practice of rapid weight loss we all know as weight cutting. And fans, especially the really informed ones online, they knew exactly where to look. It almost feels like common sense when you think about it. Fighters are draining their bodies, trying to get a competitive edge. But in doing that, they're stripping away their brain's most important natural defense. To really get the risk here, you need to know about this stuff. Your brain isn't just, rattling around inside your skull. It's floating in what's called cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. The easiest way to think about it is like this. It's the brain's own personal airbag. It's built-in helmet. And here's the huge problem. When a fighter dehydrates themselves super fast to make weight, they are draining that protective fluid around their brain. And that fluid is one of the last things in the body to rehydrate. So what does that mean? It means they step into the ring with their safety system totally compromised. Every single punch allows the brain to slam against the inside of the skull with way more force than it should. So this creates this huge kind of no-win situation for the people making the rules. Right now, most places have day before weigh-ins. This gives fighters over 24 hours to rehydrate, sure, but it also encourages them to do these insane, dangerous weight cuts to get a size advantage. The alternative, same-day weigh-ins, would stop those huge cuts, but you'd risk fighters getting in the ring while they're still weak and dehydrated. It's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. There's no easy fix here. And look, this damage isn't just some theory. The science is starting to paint a really grim picture of the long-term, cumulative cost of a career in the ring. A major review that analyzed data from hundreds and hundreds of boxers came back with this number: 30%. Let that sink in for a second. Nearly 1 out of every 3 fighters studied showed signs of brain atrophy. That means their brain was literally shrinking. And the cognitive fallout is even more widespread: 61%. The same study found that over half of the boxers showed symptoms of dementia or amnesia. For so many of these guys, this isn't a risk. It's pretty much the expected price of being in the sport. Now this is where it gets really interesting. Yeah, all combat sports have risks. But study after study shows that the risk of concussion in boxing is way higher than in sports like karate or taekwondo. And why is that? Well, it's the very rules of the sport. The goal, over 12 rounds, is repeated trauma to the head. It's almost designed to maximize this specific type of injury. Okay, but this isn't just about science and rules, right? There's this other powerful, and you could even say toxic, cultural element that's just baked into boxing. It's this whole mentality of toughness that can push fighters way past the point of no return. In Japan, where this tragedy happened, that culture is incredibly strong. People often call it a bushido, or warrior code, this die-on-your-shield mentality where quitting is seen as the ultimate dishonor, even if continuing means risking your life. And this pressure is everywhere, not just Japan. Fans and even commentators will call a fighter a quitter for making a smart choice to protect themselves. So you have this environment where a fighter's own survival instincts are constantly at war with their professional pride and reputation. And it's not just the fighters putting this pressure on themselves. The whole system around them can fail. You've got referees maybe letting a fight go on too long. You've got corners who just won't throw in the towel. The training itself, with intense, hard sparring, racks up damage long before fight night. And in some of these recent cases, there were also reports of slow or just plain inadequate medical responses at the arena. So the horrible events in Tokyo really forced everyone's hand. It lit a fire under the governing bodies, especially in Japan. But these conversations, they're not new. Medical professionals have been sounding the alarm on this for years, pushing for a whole list of common sense rules to protect fighters from the sport and, honestly, from themselves. And to their credit, the Japan Boxing Commission moved fast. They went right after the main problems we've been talking about. They brought in mandatory hydration tests. They started penalizing fighters who gained way too much weight back after the weigh-in. They cut summon championship fights from 12 to 10 rounds. And, crucially, they made it a rule that an ambulance has to be on site for all pro fights. But, for a lot of doctors and experts, these are just Band-Aids. Groups like the Association of Ringside Physicians, they argue we need to go way further. They've been calling for big, fundamental changes for years. Things like using much bigger gloves in sparring, minimizing headshots in training, having much stricter rules on weight cutting, creating a central medical database to track a fighter's health their whole career, and even setting up an anonymous system so people can report if a fighter is showing signs of brain damage. And that's where we land. At the end of the day, you can add rules, you can change the gloves, you can have the best medical care on the planet, but it all comes back to this one really tough and maybe unanswerable question. When the entire point of a sport is to intentionally cause trauma to an opponent's brain, can you ever really make it safe? Or is tragedy just baked into the DNA of the sport? That's the unforgiving question boxing now has to answer.